A randomizer has the chance of being one of the most insane ways you can play a Pokemon game. Your first Pokemon could end up being a legendary or just a simple trubbish. Everything is entirely randomized, from Pokemon locations to abilities to even trainer names. And as if all that chaos wasn't enough already, I'll also be adding on the hardcore Nuzlocke rule set that you see on screen now. With all that out of the way though, I start my journey by randomizing my character selection, picking my name Zango, then heading off into the Alola region. After getting a good night's rest, I decide to put on the dumbest hat I can find, then head out to look for my starter. Before I get the choice at a Pokemon, I have to go help out Lily, who makes a really dumb decision by letting her Cosmog out of the bag. She's gonna make this decision a lot throughout the game, which I honestly don't understand why, because at a certain point, you'd think you'd learn from your mistakes. Regardless, after dying trying to save her, I'm finally able to go pick my starter, and these options are really bad. I get to pick between Mime Jr., Pawniard, and Mienfoo. All of these Pokemon have really late evolutions, and I'm not even sure Mime Jr. will even evolve because it only evolves once it learns the move Mimic, and like I said, everything's random. Since I'm probably gonna have this starter for a pretty long time, I decide to pick Mienfoo as it's got the best stats out of the 3 Pokemon. I give it the nickname Yellow, then check out its ability, which I find out is Imposter, which is the worst ability in the entire game. I'll get into why that is a little bit later, but all you need to know for now is that that's terrible. The next step on my journey is completing this rival battle, and this is actually a really hard fight for no reason. Both of us are just forced to launch anchor shots at each other until eventually one of us wins the speed tie, subsequently winning the fight. Thankfully, Professor Kukui is about to give me some Pokeballs so I can actually catch another Pokemon, and it ends up being a Tynamo. I'm not sure if you guys know Tynamo's base stat total, but it's really bad. After giving it the nickname White, I check out its moveset, which is actually pretty solid, so at least it's a little redeemable. With Tynamo as my ace Pokemon, I head into my second rival battle against leader Leo. Thanks to the move Fire Pledge, this fight is actually pretty simple, and after dealing with him, I get myself the Z Bracelet. Unfortunately, the Z Bracelet just ends up being a really expensive piece of jewelry, since I'm not going to use Z moves throughout this run because they're pretty broken. That being said, the next step on my journey is questioning Professor Kukui for what he was doing in this house, and heading out to catch my next Pokemon in the trainer school. Nothing could be worse than the Pokemon we have now, except maybe another Pokemon with Imposter, but the chances of that happening are so... oh my gosh. Why wouldn't we get a second Pokemon with the ability? I mean, it's so terrible for a ton of reasons, the main one being we are constantly in a speed tie. This essentially makes every single turn a 50-50, whether or not I go first or the enemy Pokemon is determined by a coin flip. On top of that, both Pokemon have the exact same stats except for HP, and since we get the same movesets, every battle becomes a battle of attrition. Regardless, we are way too early in the run to just turn down a Pokemon, so I have to catch this thing, and after I do, I give it the nickname Brown. So with 2 Imposter Pokemon as well as a Tynamo, I have to somehow beat the trainer school. Most of the Pokemon in here were admittedly pretty easy. That was until I made it to the principal of the trainer school, who led with a Panpour as I brought out Tynamo. My Tynamo was able to make quick work of Panpour with just a Thunderbolt, but the next Pokemon, Petalil, was way more of a problem. To be honest, I thought I could easily kill with just a single Sacred Fire, but I was definitely wrong as I only ended up doing half. Petalil then nailed me with a 120 base power Leaf Storm that took out my Tynamo. With my Tynamo dead, I have to finish off Petalil with one of my Imposter Pokemon. This means after this fight, I'm left with 2 Imposter Pokemon going into the next city. In this place, Lily decides to ask me a pretty weird question. She says, "Do you pick your own clothes?" And yeah, of course I do. Anyways though, I'm actually able to get an encounter in this city, and it ends up being a Duosion. I quickly catch it and give it the nickname Lime. Lime has a really bad moveset and an even worse nature for a Duosion. I'll have to look to evolve this thing really quickly as it won't be serviceable for a really long time. Regardless, from here I can head towards the next big fight, which is against Team Skull and then subsequently Lima. Thankfully, his team really isn't that great, so after I deal with the Happiny, I can easily deal with the Noibat that comes next with a 4-time super effective ice type move. From here, it's on to Route 2 where I can catch myself another Pokemon. This one ends up being one of the best possible encounters I could have gotten in C-Dot. Now, on its own, C-Dot is really mediocre, but its evolution is so soon that I can evolve it right away. This is immediately really massive for me because right after I give it the nickname Beige and deal with Team Skull, I head inside the trial and evolve C-Dot into Sceptile. This Sceptile ends up being perfect for my team because not only does it have the move Boom Burst, but it also has the ability Intimidate. Knowing those two things, I decide to head into my first trial against Sunflora. I start out by going for a Boom Burst as Sunflora hits me with a Petal Blizzard. Sunflora then calls down for help, bringing out Fomantis, but this doesn't really matter as I have Boom Burst, which hits two Pokemon at the same time. This means Sunflora's ally gets one shot and I do another third to the Totem Pokemon. At a third remaining, all it takes is one more Boom Burst to finish this battle and win me my first trial. At this point, I walk out into the cave and immediately encounter a Mega Gallade, which kinda shows you how crazy this run can get. After swiftly running away from that fight, I find myself talking to Professor Kukui, who decides to obliterate this poor Growlithe with a breakneck blitz. A little bit extreme of him if you ask me, but I don't judge as I just make my way onto Route 3 where I can catch another Pokemon, this one being Braviary. Braviary was a little bit difficult to catch, but in the end, I was glad I did as it has a really high attack stat as well as a super solid moveset. I name him Red, then go and help out Lily as she's let her Cosmog out of the bag yet again. In this place, I can actually catch a Pokemon, and it would have been a good encounter if it wasn't a Sandile with Imposter. I kill it simply out of spite, then after helping Lily get her Cosmog back, I find myself in a rival battle. This one is yet another easy fight and basically just leads me into the first grand trial. This fight is against Hala, and he leads with a Cacnea as I bring out my Sceptile. Cacnea is really not that strong of a Pokemon, so all it takes is a Dragon Pulse and Boom Burst to finish it off and bring out the next Pokemon, Deerling. Deerling is technically his ace Pokemon, and since I'm a little bit scared of it, I decide to switch out into Braviary. This ended up being a perfect decision as on the switch in, Braviary gets hit by a Bug-type Z move. That would have most certainly killed my Sceptile, and on the following turn, Deerling nearly kills my Braviary by hitting me with a Fusion Bolt. Thankfully, I ended up surviving at 6 HP, but that was definitely way too close for comfort. After just a single fly, Deerling goes down, and the last Pokemon, Happiny, gets sent in. For Happiny, I simply just switch in between both of my Imposter Pokemon and take it out with its own moveset, and that wins me my first grand trial. Once I get my Tauros Ride Pager, I head over to Akala Island. Now that I'm here, I have a quick fight with Dexio, who leads with a Pansear, which was a little bit scary for me because it had Soundproof and Incinerate. Thankfully, Incinerate didn't do too much, so I was able to make quick work of it with my other Pokemon. From there, I head over to Route 4 where I catch a Bulbasaur that I nicknamed Green. Bulbasaur is one of those Pokemon that I can immediately evolve, so that's exactly what I do, bringing it into a Crocodile. Crocodile is a really solid Pokemon, and it has the ability Primordial Sea. On most other Pokemon, this ability would be pretty good, but on Crocodile, not so much. The reason for that is because I essentially take 4 times damage from water-type moves, but I won't worry about that for now as I have a rival battle. Like it was before, it's relatively simple, as all I need to do is go for super effective moves with my Crocodile and Braviary. From there, I continue on with the story a little bit, play with this Miltank for whatever reason, then head into a battle with Gladion. Thankfully, Gladion's team really isn't that amazing as he leads with a Burmy and his second Pokemon is a Leafeon. Thankfully, I've got my flying-type Pokemon Braviary that can deal with both of them, so it's not much of a challenge. Now though, I do have to prepare myself for what could be a pretty difficult battle in the second trial. As I'm going through my preparations, I walk up to this berry tree and actually end up finding myself an ability capsule. The reason why this is so good for me is because I can actually change the ability of one of my Imposter Pokemon. In the end, I decide on Bouffalant as Mienfoo can still evolve. With that out of the way, I go ahead and challenge Totem Wishy-Washy that ends up being an actual Deoxys. This could have been really bad, but thankfully, instead of going for an attacking move, Deoxys decided to set up a Reflect. Reflect does not affect your special defense, so all it took was one Boom Burst to deal with this thing and win me the battle in just one hit. With that shockingly easy trial down, I head over to the Sudowoodo, show them my Water Z Crystal, then get into a squabble with Team Skull. They thankfully don't have any legendaries on their team, so I head directly into this Battle Royale Dome. To be honest, I'm not really sure why they call it that. All I know is that I'm terrified after Gladion sent in his Mega Absol. Thankfully, we get out of their deathless and can freely move on to the third trial. This one is against Rotom Freeze, which is really bad for me as I decided to lead with Braviary. This essentially forces me to switch right away, and I decide to move into Yellow, my Mienfoo. After activating the ability Imposter, I figure out what moves Rotom has, but not really how to deal with it. It's then at this point, Rotom calls down its partner Pokemon Carvanha. What I end up doing next is a big mistake, as I hit Rotom with a Body Slam, and then I get hit by a Hyper Beam. This Hyper Beam takes me down to 26 remaining, but this Carvanha has yet to move and decides to go for a Heat Crash. This move barely takes out my Mienfoo, but it still means I've lost my starter. Mienfoo's death was not in vain though, as it allowed allows me to get a free switch into Sceptile, and since Rotom went for Hyper Beam, I essentially have a free turn here. With this turn, I go for Boom Burst, one-shotting Carvanha and doing about a third to Rotom. On the next, I do the exact same thing, taking out the second Carvanha and bringing Rotom down into the red. This unfortunately activates its berry, which allows it to get a special attack boost when hitting me with Bug Buzz. This leaves me with just 6 HP remaining, but thankfully on the next turn, all I need to go for is just one more Boom Burst and that'll win me this battle. That trial was by far the hardest one we've had, but we're still not out of the woodworks yet, as we still have one more on this island. This one is in the Lush Jungle, and on my way there, I meet up with Colrus, who gives me the worst TM I could have ever gotten in Sleep Talk. I can't even really complain about that though, as this route had a lot of good things for me, one of which being a Life Orb, and the Pokemon Center in this route actually sells leftovers. Both of these items I take into the Lush Jungle, where I start my next trial. After going through this weird sort of ritual, we finally summon Lurantis, which ends up being a Mischievous. After getting flashbacks from my last video, I try to make quick work of this Pokemon by going for a single foul play. This ended up being the worst thing I could have done, as after OHKOing, I find out Mischievous has the ability Inwards Out. This ability then one-shots my Crocodile, causing me to lose yet another Pokemon. This means we are down to 4 Pokemon remaining, and we've got to get some new ones soon, or else we're probably going to lose this run. In order to do that, I have to progress in the story, and I do that by watching Lily pretend to be me. First of all, I'd never use the move Splash. Second of all, what are you doing? I then see a little crack in the sky before heading into Diglett Cave and finding myself a Rhydon. This Rhydon was definitely a little bit difficult to catch, but eventually it got in a ball, and I gave it the nickname Gray. After leaving the cave, I head into the city, where I find a Probopass who gives me a letter. This letter really only wanted to tell me that I am 1,000 subscribers away from hitting 100k, so if you're enjoying this video, then please hit that sub button, I'd really appreciate it. Now that that weird letter is out of the way, I decide to head over to the next route, where I find myself another Pokemon, this one being Treecko. This Treecko was relatively easy to catch, and I gave it the nickname Forest Green. Treecko's evolution is really early, so I evolve it right away, turning it into a Mega Lucario. That is definitely one of the coolest Pokemon I could have gotten, and I get to use him right away against Team Skull. After taking down a few of their members, I go ahead and fight Olivia for my second grand trial. She leads this fight with Kabuto as I bring out Lucario. With Lucario, I start out by going for a Rock Smash, doing about 2/3 as Kabuto hits me with a Water Pulse. This Water Pulse ends up confusing me, and it actually changes my typing into water because of my ability Color Change. The confusion is really the only thing I'm worried about though, so I just switch into Sceptile to get rid of it. I then just take out Kabuto with a Needle Arm, and Trophius gets sent in next. I was a little bit worried about Trophius having a flying type move, so I decided to switch into Gray. With Gray, I did a lot of damage to Trophius, but I just couldn't kill it, so I moved into Braviary to finish the job. With that, all it took was a single Metal Claw on Trophius to take it down and bring out the final Pokemon, Bayleaf. With Bayleaf being weak to flying type moves, all it took was a single one of those to win me this battle. With that, I had now finished my second grand trial and could make my way towards the Aether Foundation. This place is home to a lot of nice people who I'm sure won't turn evil at any point in this game. While I was there, an Ultra Beast popped up, and it ended up being a Tapu Koko. While I was trying to catch it, it just ran away from me, so hopefully I find one later, I guess. Regardless, from here, the only thing I need to do is get back on the boat and head towards Ula Ula Island. As soon as I touch land, I'm challenged to a rival battle, and do I even need to tell you guys how this went? With that finished, I meet up with Alolan Professor Oak, then go to the library. This library has some pretty confusing text. I mean, who knows what the word asunder means? Regardless, after dealing with a little bit more of Team Skull, I head to the top of Mount Hokalani, where I've got a trial waiting for me. Before I do that though, I get myself in a quick battle where I unexpectedly evolve my Duosion into a War Turtle. After helping Sophocles burn a few extra calories, I meet up with the totem that's actually Hippowdon. Now, this would have been the perfect lead as I brought my Sceptile out, but instead, this Hippowdon has Imposter and turns into my Sceptile. This is honestly really okay though, as if the opposing Pokemon uses Boom Burst, it's actually gonna hit its teammate. That being said, I start this fight by going for Boom Burst, doing about 2/5 as Sceptile decides to set up a Cotton Guard. Gothorita is the Pokemon that gets called down for help and gets brought down to half after I go for another Boom Burst. With that, the Totem Sceptile decides to copy me, going for the exact same move and hitting his own Gothorita. This leaves them both with slivers remaining, so all I need to do is go for one more Boom Burst to win myself my 5th trial. After obtaining my Z Crystal, I go down the mountain and end up meeting up with Guzma. If you've played Sun and Moon before, you know that Guzma is a little bit of a weird guy and his team usually sucks. Sadly, he is still a weirdo, but on the bright side, his team does still suck, so that's good. We get to make quick work of him, then move on a little bit in the story where I'm given a Mudstale ride pager. All this does is enable me to walk on these hard stones, which I'm pretty sure I could have walked on anyways, but thank you, I guess. I then go ahead and beat up some preschoolers as well as some Team Skull members as I make my way towards the 6th totem. Unfortunately, this one ended up being yet another Rotom, this time Rotom Heat. There is a silver lining here though, and that's because I decided to lead with Rhydon, who has 4 times super effective Stomping Tantrum. Rotom charged a Solar Beam as I went for the Stomping Tantrum and did about 2/3. This caused Golduck to get called down for help, and since both of them are going to be going for super effective moves, I decided to switch out. I moved into Bouffalant, who tanked all the damage but got left with 30 HP remaining. From there I switched into Sceptile to hopefully mitigate any further damage, and for some reason Golduck just decided to self-destruct. This obviously took down the Golduck, but didn't do that much damage to me or the Rotom on the other side. Persian then got called down for help as Rotom goes for a Shell Trap on the next turn, but it doesn't do anything as I elected to go for Boom Burst. This did a good bit of damage to Persian as well as Rotom, and on that same turn I got hit by a Throat Chop. This Throat Chop makes it so that I can't use Boom Burst on the next turn, but it really doesn't matter as Rotom's so low a simple Dragon Pulse kills. From there, a simple Petal Blizzard is all I need to do to win me this fight. With that, I've won the 6th trial and can head forward into the story where I've got to fight even more Team Skull. There's a lot of Team Skull battles here, but all you need to know is that I destroyed literally every single one of them. On my way to their not-so-secret base, I meet up with the Unova Elite 4 member, Grimsley. He has me flip a coin for whatever reason, but I don't want to pick a side, so I just simply don't. Apparently though, that was somehow the correct answer, as a Skarmory was supposed to come and then take the coin out of the air. Yeah, I don't know, this guy's just yapping. He does give me a Sharpedo ride pager though, which I'm actually pretty thankful for, because it allows me to continue into the story and evolve my War Turtle into a Machamp. This is a really solid evolution, and I'm gonna make sure I use it by going through all of Team Skull with it. After defeating so many of their members, they finally send me off to Guzma to fight him for the 2nd time. He is still just as weird as before, and his team's just as bad too, so all I need to do is bring out my Mega Lucario, and he essentially faints for me. The next big fight I have is against Gladion, and for whatever reason, he wants to fight me because he thinks I stole his sister. It turns out I wasn't the one who took her, and it was actually the Aether Foundation, and I'm sure it's that Cosmog's fault. The actual battle with him though went really easily, as he's got 3 normal types, which are kinda just Lucario fodder. Now, the last step of getting off this island is fighting Nanu for my 3rd grand trial. He leads this fight with Kadabra as I bring out Gray, my Rhydon. Kadabra starts out by hitting me with a Hyperspace Hole, doing a ton of damage, taking me down to 37 remaining. I then go for just one brutal swing, which takes all of Kadabra's health and brings out the next Pokemon, Pansage. Pansage is likely going to go for a grass type attack, so I switch into Red, my flying type. That gets tanked with relative ease, as on the following turn I go for a Fly, which finishes off the Pansage with a one-shot. Last up is the Ace Pokemon Plusle, who starts out by going for a Gigavolt Havoc as I switch into my Sceptile to tank it. This doesn't even deal half my HP as I put Plusle to sleep on the next turn using Spore. Now, all I need to do is go for 2 more Petal Blizzards, that finishes off the Plusle and wins me the 3rd grand trial. From here, I can finally go towards the Aether Paradise, where I've got to fight a bunch of these Aether Foundation members, including Champion Scott? This is where I go through a little bit of extra story, figuring out that Cosmog is actually some sort of Ultra Beast. I can't really let that sink in for too long though, as I've got another fight with Guzma coming up, and this time his team means business. Right away, he leads this fight with a Uxie as I bring out my Machamp. I probably should have just immediately switched here, but instead I stayed in, getting hit by a Mist Ball, dealing super effective damage to me. I then went for a Sunsteel Strike, only doing about a third as I just switched out into Bouffalant afterwards. With the Bouffalant, I took out Uxie with a couple of Night Slashes, but I was left with 38 HP remaining going into the next Pokemon, Venusaur. For Venusaur, I assumed Braviary would be a really good switch, as you know, flying is super effective against grass, but I was absolutely wrong. Right when I switched, Venusaur decided to start setting up Coil over and over again. This allowed him to raise his defense stat as well as his attack stat both at the same time. I then went for a Brave Bird hoping to get the Oko, but I didn't even get close and I took 30 damage in recoil. On the next turn, I got hit by a Sunsteel Strike that left me with 1 HP remaining. Thankfully, instead of going for another Brave Bird, I went for Fly instead, which allowed me to finish off the Venusaur in the next turn. That right there was as close to death as it gets. I mean, the rest of the fight was pretty easy, but right there, that was terrifying. It's after this battle that I've got to go fight Lusamine after she tries to destroy the entire world for whatever reason. Thankfully, my team basically fully counters hers, so all it takes is a couple good moves and I've won this fight. With Lusamine defeated, she gets taken by this portal and just fully disappears, so I head over to Poni Island. On this island, I get a ton of good encounters, and the first one is actually Mienfoo. I'd love to believe it's my starter coming back to me, so I catch it and give it the nickname Yellow V2. I then evolve it into a Quilladin, and then subsequently an Incineroar, which could be really good for this run. After changing my team around a bit, I get myself a Scizor, which, I'll be honest guys, is not that useful. From there, I push around a few boulders with my new Machamp Ride Pager, then find Hapu, becoming the Island Kahuna. It's at that point that me and Lily decide to go get the Sunflu, and once we do, we fight a little bit more with Team Skull. This is the last time in the game that I have to worry about them, so everybody you can cheer now. With that, it's time to fight Hapu in my 4th Grand Trial, and she leads this fight with Maractus as I bring out my Incineroar. She starts by going for a Trop Kick, lowering my attack by 1 stage as I then go for a Fire Lash, taking Maractus down into the red. On the next turn, Hapu heals, but one more Fire Lash is enough to take down the Maractus and bring out the next Pokemon, Simisage. For some reason, Simisage decides to immediately switch out by going for a Baton Pass into Gigalith. Gigalith takes not very effective damage in the switch in, and on the next turn, I decide to switch out into Gray, my Rhydon. Rhydon gets hit by a 4x super effective Aqua Jet, taking me down to half as I then go for a Stomping Tantrum, leaving Gigalith with a Sliver. Instead of switching out here, I decide to eat another Aqua Jet, leaving me with 27 remaining as I get to finish off Gigalith with a Stomping Tantrum. With him down, Simisage comes back in, so I switch out into Braviary to deal super effective damage. Simisage then misses a Thunder, which definitely would have killed me, so I'm super glad it missed, as on the next turn, he switches out with a Baton Pass, and I hit Cherim with Fly. Cherim really doesn't stand a chance against Braviary, so all I need to do is go for a Brave Bird to take it down. Last up is Simisage, and for this, I'm definitely switching out this time. I move into my Sceptile, who finishes off Simisage with a couple of Boom Bursts, and with that, I've won my final Grand Trial. Now I walk into this cave where I get my first encounter of the route, and it ends up being a Landorus with Speed Boost. This is a huge encounter for me because it takes my otherwise mediocre team over the top. While attempting to catch the Landorus, I nearly killed it as I hit it with a brutal swing that got a critical hit. Thankfully, it survived at 1, which means I get to catch it and give it the nickname Orange. From here, I'm able to get into my final trial against Totem Garchomp. This was a super stressful one as I was basically playing around a critical hit the entire battle. The reason for this is because I kept spamming Strength Sap over and over again to bring Garchomp's attack stat down to -6. Once his attack was that low, I brought in a couple different Pokemon to eventually fully take him down and win myself my final trial. It's now where I get my last fight against Lusamine in, and this one could be really difficult. Her team isn't going to be a pushover this time, and I'm really scared to see what she's got. I rearrange my team, put Gray back on the squad, and evolve it using a protector that I found into a Mega Salamence. Salamence is a great Pokemon, and I'm super excited to use it as Lusamine leads with her Scizor. For this, what I decide to do is switch out into my Landorus and go for a Fire Lash that's 4x super effective and Okos. The next Pokemon to come in is Typhlosion, who goes down to a couple of Stomping Tantrums from Salamence. With that, Mandibuzz is the 3rd Pokemon out, and thankfully this thing doesn't have a really high attack stat, so I'm not too worried about it after switching through a bunch of my Pokemon. Eventually, Mega Lucario is the one to take the kill, as the 4th Pokemon to come in is Ninetales. Ninetales is the 2nd fire type in this fight that I really don't care about, as I have super effective Stomping Tantrum to deal with it. Last out is Mismagius, so I switch into the only Pokemon I haven't utilized yet, and that's Machamp. Machamp is easily able to deal with Mismagius by going for 2 consecutive waterfalls, and with that, we can freely head towards the Elite Four. The last thing we have to do is catch our legendary, which ends up being an actual legendary in Xerneas. With the move Spore by my side, I put Xerneas to sleep and can freely catch it by spamming Great Balls. I give it the nickname Blue, then head towards Victory Road. In Victory Road, I get into a fight with Gladion, but as every single other fight with Gladion has gone in this video, it's an easy sweep. I then rearrange my team's movesets by using a couple of heart skills that I found, and I can actually teach my Mega Salamence Spatial Ren. With pretty much every Pokemon on my team having a really solid moveset, my final team looks like this: Salamence, Sceptile, Lucario, Xerneas, Incineroar, and Landorus. It's safe to say I've got a pretty good squad going into these final battles. That being said, after swiftly completing my final rival battle, I bring my team up to the level cap and then get ready to challenge the Elite Four. In my first battle, I decide to go up against Sonia. She leads this fight with Kangaskhan as I bring out Lucario. Kangaskhan starts by going for a Sparkling Aria as I then then decide to go for a Sacred Sword that's super effective and brings Kangaskhan down to about a third remaining. Kangaskhan really can't do much damage to me until it eventually hits me with a dual chop, taking me down to 69 and turning me into a dragon type. Thankfully, I'm still in a good position though, as another Sacred Sword takes him down and brings out the next Pokemon, Chestnut. Chestnut is pretty bulky, but really can't eat flying type moves as they are 4 times super effective, so all it takes is 1 acrobatics to take this big thing down. Next up is Ambipom, and since I already know its moveset, I know it's probably gonna hit me with a Rock Slide here. That's exactly what it decides to do, as I almost take it out with a Sacred Sword. On the following turn, instead of dying to a Sacred Sword, it decides to switch out into Gliscor, who takes minimal damage. Against Gliscor, I don't really have any great switches, so I just decide to bring out Beige. Beige does just enough damage to kill with 2 Boom Bursts, as the next Pokemon to come back in is Ambipom. With Ambipom already being so low, it doesn't take much, and only 1 Boom Burst to take it down. Last out is Electros, who isn't really much of a problem for me since I have my Landorus. Like you've seen throughout the entirety of this run, its ability is gonna be randomized, so it doesn't have Levitate, and I can kill it with 2 Drill Runs, winning me my first Elite Four battle. For my next fight, I want to go up against Olivia, who leads with Gorbus, as I bring out Blue, my Xerneas. With Blue, I start out by going for a Diamond Storm, which sharply raises my defense stat and does about a third. On the next turn, a Play Rough almost takes the KO, as I then get hit by a Brick Break, literally only doing 7 damage. From here, Olivia switches into Survivor, which is a great switch since I was going for Play Rough. On the next turn, I try for a Diamond Storm, but it doesn't do too much, and I get hit by a critical hit Venoshock that leaves me with a Sliver. This forces me to switch out into Lucario, who won't take any damage because it's a poison type move. On the next turn, I leave Survivor with a Sliver remaining after going for an Acrobatics, as I then get hit by a Sacred Fire. This move nearly kills my Lucario, but thankfully I survive with 27 remaining, and since I outspeed Survivor, I take it down with another Acrobatics. Now Alola Mola comes in? Not sure if that's how you say it, but I think I got it. And since my Lucario is pretty weak, I just switch out into Sceptile and go for a couple of Giga Drains. Before this thing can get taken down, it switches out with Baton Pass, moving into Cryogonal. Cryogonal is honestly a really useless Pokemon, as all it does is set up Sunny Day, which makes my Fusion Flares hit even harder. I almost took it down, but it got healed by a full restore, which caused me to switch out into my Incineroar. Incineroar did the finishing touches there, as back out is Alola Mola. For this, I do the exact same thing I did before, simply just switching into Sceptile. Sceptile takes minimal damage on the switch in, and fully heals in the next turn by going for another Giga Drain. Gorbus is the second to last Pokemon, and after one more Giga Drain, all that's left is Miltank. Miltank is a really annoying Pokemon, but thankfully it's not really that good, so all I need to do is go for a handful of different moves from my Sceptile to eventually win me my second Elite Four battle. Next up is Jessica, who leads this fight with an attack form Deoxys. Thankfully I led this fight with my Incineroar, so I have a pretty good matchup, and I decide to go for a Darkest Lariat when she just simply switches out into her Lucario. This means I essentially did no damage, as on the next turn I go for a Fire Lash, which is way more effective. This Fire Lash easily takes out Lucario, and with the next Pokemon being Claydol, I decide to make a switch of my own and move into Sceptile. With Sceptile, it takes a handful of Giga Drains to eventually take this thing down and bring out the next Pokemon, Jinx. Against Jinx, I start with a Fusion Flare, which does almost half, as I then get hit by a Freeze Dry that leaves me with a Sliver remaining. Safe to say, I probably should have switched out there, but everything ended up being a-okay, as Jinx has the ability True On. This allows me to get a free switch into my Lucario and knock the Jinx off the board with a Shadow Bone. Now, the speed form of Deoxys gets thrown back in, but is really no match for my Lucario, because he just one-shots with a Shadow Bone. Last and almost certainly least is Manectric, who doesn't even do any damage to me before going down to my Lucario, and this wins me my third Elite Four battle. Last up is Mia, who leads with Licky Licky, as I decide to bring out my Incineroar. With Incineroar, I go for a Fire Lash that brings down Licky Licky's defense stat by 1 stage, as it then raises it by 2 stages. Licky Licky then just straight up switches out into a Soul Rock that takes not very effective damage in the switch in, but on the next turn this is very different, as I go for a Darkest Lariat that one-shots. This then brings out the third Pokemon, Escavalier, who's 4 times weak to fire type moves, so you already know how this goes. This brings out a Houndoom, who's really no match for my Landorus, so that's where I decide to switch. All me and Landorus really need to do is go for consecutive drill runs to take down the Houndoom and give myself a few speed boosts going into the final 2 Pokemon. One of these 2 Pokemon is a Alolan Executor, who really isn't much of an issue, especially when you realize I have Aeroblast. That being said, all it took was a couple of those, only because full restores kept healing up Executor to full HP, but it doesn't matter, as last up is Licky Licky, and this is pretty easy to take down. After 2 Dragon Ascents, Licky Licky's taken care of, and I win my final Elite Four battle and can check challenge the champion, or I guess in this game, Dr. Marshall. He leads this fight with Sudowoodo as I bring out Blue, my Xerneas. Against Sudowoodo, I start with a Moonblast that does a little over half as I then get hit by a head charge that kills Sudowoodo and recoil damage. The next Pokemon is probably not going to be so easy as it's Cobalion. Cobalion isn't really too difficult to deal with as all I have to do is switch into my Incineroar, who has pretty good access to fire type moves. I just have to hope that Cobalion doesn't have any super effective moves against me, and thankfully it doesn't seem like he did. That being said, after just 2 Fire Lashes, Cobalion goes down and brings out Ambipom. Ambipom I've seen a lot recently, so I have a good idea of what it's about to go for. In order to counter it, I switch into my Lucario like I always do, and I end up getting hit by a Magma Storm. Thankfully, it didn't become the biggest deal in the world as I got to Oko with a Sacred Sword, but still, I could have lost a Pokemon there. The 4th Pokemon to come in is Kabutops, who's also, coincidentally, 4 times weak to Grass-type moves. As you can imagine, this gave me a really easy switch into Sceptile, who just simply Oko'd with a Giga Drain. Next up is Azelf, who I immediately put to sleep with Spore, then I decided to switch into my Mega Salamence. With Salamence, I kinda just pray Azelf stays sleeping, and I actually end up getting really lucky here, as it stays asleep for the full 3 turns, and I get to take it out with 2 Aeroblasts. Lastly, the final Pokemon of this entire ROM hack ends up being Raticate, so not too difficult. Now, the last thing I have to do is finish off Raticate by going for a couple of Spatial Rens. In reality, this should have only taken 2 Spatial Rens, but for some reason, I just kept missing over and over again. Regardless, eventually I did land that final Spatial Ren, which won me this fight and won me my randomizer. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as I am so close to 100K. Thanks again to everyone for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.